So Harriet Bart, whose exhibition we're here to see today, has been exhibited extensively throughout the United States and Germany, and she has completed more than a dozen public art commissions in the United States, Japan, and Israel. She has been the recipient of fellowships from the Bush Foundation, McKnight Foundation, McDowell Colony, Virginia Center for Creative Arts, the NEA Arts Midwest, and the Minnesota State Arts Board. Since 2000, Bart has published numerous fine arts books and mixed media book awards. She has won 3 Minnesota Book Awards, most recently in 2015 for Ghost Maps. And her work is included in many museum, university, and private collections, including ours, in the permanent collection as well as the Art on Campus collection. And so before we begin our talk, I just want to also thank those who made the exhibition possible. So the exhibition Harriet Bart, Material Alchemy, is organized by University Museums with support for this exhibition provided by the J.W. Fisher Endowed Arts Outreach Fund, Dana Schumacher, Zora and Tom Zimmerman, Marsha and Jim Burrell, Phyllis and Larry Lepke, and University Museums membership. Educational support is provided by the Kathy and John Howell Art Enrichment Program. So, with that. With the two galleries that you either saw earlier or will see after the talk, basically we have Harriet Bart's Material Alchemy upstairs and Alchemy of the Word in the downstairs gallery. And there is really just a survey of Harriet's work starting from the 1970s up to the present with the most recent installation of Reckoning, and then along with the selection of artist books and book objects. So your first question, Harriet, and in the selection of these works, there's a really broad range. And how do you see your practice as an artist evolving over time, and what are the themes that reoccur throughout your work over the years?
There's been a big change in my work in terms of media. I started out in fiber art in the early 70s when reading was becoming a media for sculpture. So that's my background, that's my training. But I found that materials, I'm very drawn to materials in the sense that I work in painting, in bronze, casting, found objects. So my body of work has changed, I would say, rather radically in many ways in terms of material. But it's not changed a whole lot in the subject matter over time. I have a long-term, deep, abiding interest in the personal and cultural expression of memory. It's at the core of what I do. At heart, I think I'm a storyteller. So when I begin to work with the body of work, I choose my materials based on the story I'm trying to tell. Does that help? Did I answer it?
And then David, whatever. I think with a lot of these, evolving concepts in media really are represented well within the show, and I think really reappear within the vast variety of media and textile works and more within that choosing, but to portray a subject. But how does the medium that you're working with affect the process and the creation of the work?
I think it starts the other way around. It starts with an idea. Often it starts with a poem, or something that I've read, or something that I've heard. So language is my biggest motivator and my primary resource. And once I've come up with a subject, something I want to work on, then I figure out which material, which media I should use to execute it. So I almost never start with material. I start with idea. And because I'm a very haptic person, I like to work with my hands. I have a number of skill levels I can use. It frees me to work with a variety of materials. So unlike, kind of like Madonna, I'm a materials girl.
And with that, I think some of the materials that we see throughout this show, especially, is the idea of your work and with the idea of the quotidian, which is, as you walk in, you're literally expressed, but also with the idea of using everyday objects transformed into something special or sacred. Another version of this is Reckoning, the large installation in the gallery. Fits this idea very well. So I'd like you to kind of expand on that installation.
On reckoning.
Yeah, and just the idea of the 14th.
Two things. One, it's a pleasure for me to see that the piece quotidian, which has been kicking around the floor of my studio for a long time, has never been on the wall. It's finally up. And quotidian is a word that means the everyday, the ordinary everyday. And it is comprised of found tools, some of which I've had, but the way I perceive things is often through the letters of the alphabet. So a horseshoe is a U, a light meter is a Q. So I have these tools in the studio. And for me, that's play. I really enjoy seeing that he's lighthearted, it's fun, and it's there. But it also expresses my feelings about material. Reckoning, on the other hand, is a very serious subject matter. It is the primary installation in the gallery. You can't miss it when you walk in. And I have been concerned, as we all have been, about our environment, about our deep political divides, about the fact that we seem to be right now functioning in a broken world. Things are not coming together as we would hope. But it primarily functions, or primarily about environmental degradation. And I tried to think of how I would do that. And as a collector of quotidian objects, I've had these beautiful, old, rusted Harrow discs in my studio for a long time, and it seemed the perfect time to take them out. And as the Harrow discs till the soil when they're usable, I started thinking about this place as a gathering place, a place in a field that maybe was desolate and maybe destroyed even, and that there might be objects and things peeking through the soil, things that one might find if you were walking through an empty field. And so the Harrow discs become in many ways offering bowls, and they also suggest things that have come from the earth. And the objects in the Harrow disc are a combination of things from nature and things from culture. There's a bone, there's a burl, there's a model of a barn, there's shards of broken glass, there's a book, there are any number of objects. Over each disc with its object is a plumb bob. And a plumb bob is very iconic to me. I've been using it in my work for a very long time. I started out a long time ago using the plumb bob as a reference to architecture. And over years, I've kind of morphed to become this object of character and truth, a place where the vertical and horizontal meet. And so it's a true vertical, it's a plumb line. So I use that plumb very symbolically. Then there's a table, and the table has some very mysterious elements on it. Elements of lead, gold, text, a watch that's been taken apart and reconstructed, got a tear vial, a plumb bob. And it looks, I think, like a very mystical table. But I think it's for a person, he or she, who sees. It's the table where change can happen. Come to the table with the tools for symbolic transformational change. And I use gold and lead in my work as symbols of alchemy. Obviously, I'm not trying to turn base metals into gold, but I do see them symbolically as suggesting the idea of transformation, which is present in almost everything that I do, the idea of transformation. Personal transformation, also cultural transformation.
You basically answered one of my questions of just the idea of.
Did I go too long?
No, that's perfect.
Too many words.
Well, there are too many words. Just generally, we have an important connection to make, I think, downstairs. We have two sections of the gallery. There's reference to it upstairs with the patterns book, but we have an entire show basically downstairs dedicated to artist books and book objects. And I think with the word and poetry especially being so important in your practice, it's been interesting for me to see the objects and then kind of the result of the book. And I would like you kind of to speak about the word in your practice as well as creating your artist books.
Book has always been important to me. Since I was a small child. I didn't grew up in a household that did not have a lot of money, but we had books, and reading was important, and that was instilled in me early on. And there's something, for me, iconic, almost sacred about the book. Now, I know that most of you here are digital, and you're reading on your iPads, whatever it is. I still like the book. I like the way it feels, I like the way it smells. I like to turn the pages front to back and mark on them, write on them. So the books are really important to me. And I don't know exactly when they became a part of my work. But I started out making book objects. So I would take a book and I would alter it, and I would make something of it, or I would paint it, or I would take many, many books, pile them up, and build architectural structures out of books. And then I had the good fortune many years ago of meeting a woman in New York who had contacted me after an exhibition I had done of these bookworks at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And she asked if I would come and see her when I was next in New York, which I did. And she was a book dealer, rare books, artist books, and also prints. And she said to me, "Why don't you make artist books?" And I wasn't sure what an artist book was. And so it's really because of her encouragement. And she sat down and she told me what a colophon was and how I had to do all these things. So ever since then, I've not turned back. The book is very important to me. I missed when we talked about reckoning. When you look at that piece, there's a poem on the wall by Jane Hirschfield. And it's a poem that strikes me as very pertinent to reckoning. Some of my pieces come directly from a quote or phrase in a poem, and others do not. But I think that the book is the most intimate form of art, because the artist book is something that you hold, you turn it slowly or quickly or leaf through the pages. I even like seeing it on my shelf. So it's very near and dear to my heart, and I like how personal it is. And the scale is so manageable.
Jump into the question. Hopefully my voice carries enough. I'm not sure how well the microphone is working. First of all, I just want to thank Sydney and Lynette for inviting me to share the stage tonight. I'm very, very honored to be here with Harriet. You know, as I spent some time with the catalog and went through the exhibition with both of you today, Harriet, one thing I was really struck by that I think is reflected in the exhibit, and I would encourage you all to look through the catalog downstairs, is the evolution over the course of your career. I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here. I can pre-clear this question with you.
It's okay.
I felt like I noticed a evolution in your work, I think around 2000 or the early part of that decade, where to go back to memory in your statement that that's been such an important theme in your work, it seemed like the first several decades of your career were very dedicated to your personal history, your identity, as part of a Jewish family, your lived experience, your family's lived experience. And around that period, as you've spoken to, your concerns became global as well, in terms of the environment, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. If I'm correct that there was sort of a shift or an evolution around that time, can you talk a little bit about what precipitated that? And I'm going to guess you're also going to say that it's all been woven together, because aesthetically, you didn't change at all. The works have always been formally beautiful.
I can tell you so I've done a lot of work commemorating war, those that have been lost in war, the Iraq War, Vietnam War, Iraq War,
Korean War.
Afghanistan.
Okay.
And it actually came out of doing public art. So I have been doing public art. I don't do very much of it anymore, but I've been doing it for quite some time, and it was a very pleasurable thing to do. But I became more and more concerned about what happens to public art in the future. And we've seen some of that in our culture now. We wonder who put that man on the horse there? And should the man on the horse be there? And should this public art, does it offend? And I found it became problematic for me, how to proceed in a way that I felt was what I wanted to say. So I posed a problem or question to myself. If I were to make art that was commemorating a public event, but it didn't have to go anywhere, and it didn't have a budget, what would I do? And it could be temporary. So, long time ago, probably, I can't even remember which year, but probably in the 80s, I did my first commemorative war piece, and that was on Vietnam. It was a big painting. But that was before I had this thought. Then I worked on a project on Afghanistan, and I started to think what I could do. So I collected the names of all the American soldiers that were killed in Afghanistan. I collected them, you can find them online. And I took a great big piece of cyclone fencing, and using thousands of dog tags, one for every soldier killed, I created a map of Afghanistan. And it's a topographic map because the dog tags are placed where most of the deaths occurred. So some places on the fencing are deeper than others. It's in the collection of the Walker Art Center now. But it was very freeing to me because I just ordered cyclone fencing. I'm sure that there's somebody in Texas who thinks I've got a militia going on here because I'm ordering dog tags from military supply. And I thought I won't worry about it. I mean, it doesn't have to be in public. I don't have to go through the steps of meeting with the ADA, meeting with committees. And no offense to public art, I love public art, but for my temperament, it was difficult for me. Then the next one I did was the war in Iraq, and that was even more ephemeral. I created these long, long scrolls, probably each one is probably 22 feet long and maybe about that wide. And I hand wrote in cursive the name of every soldier in chronological order that was killed in the war. And they hang from the top of the wall, they slide down, curl out onto the floor, and suspended over each one is a plumb bob. And I think it's the first time I used a plumb bob in that way, that meaning. And of course, when the plumb bob moves, it almost looks like the scribe. That piece is in my studio. It rolls up, it's in a box about that big. And yet, when it's exhibited, it really fills a wall. So the commemorative, the personal, but then it became much more public. You're right about that. Didn't think about it. Good question.
I also have to just share, and I'll turn it back to Sydney, something that I found really interesting in your chronology. When Harriet talks about public art always being a concern, she means it. There was an exhibit at the Walker Art Center, which was accompanied by some graffiti, I think, on some walls outside.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this is quite a few years ago, but Harriet and her family went in the middle of the night and added their own artwork on top of the graffiti.
That was a long time ago. Like, a really long time ago.
I thought that was so fascinating. It speaks to, it spoke to, on a serious note, the multifaceted nature of your work. You've never just been a studio artist, just been concerned with galleries and exhibitions. I also just think it's very rebellious and funny.
Well, I do have a political side, and most recently I've been working with refugee and immigrant women to make bundles. That's another piece of doing myself that sometimes has the opportunity to be with. So I keep that side going. There's the personal, private side that's based more in poetry, and then there's the work that has to do with the public realm, and I try to be able to do it myself when I want and support it myself.
I think the idea of commemoration, as you brought up in the public space, is definitely a big aspect of your work, but I think in some of the objects we have in the exhibitions, we were speaking about like the garment register and the pattern pieces, and to me that's an interesting kind of other end of a commemoration.
Yeah.
Like work being done and whether or not not seen and not appreciated and things like that. So I wonder if you might comment on that.
I would like to talk about that. When I was growing up, I never saw the work of women artists. I didn't know any women artists. I worked by myself. I always made things. I was working first at my dining room table, and then when that got too small, then I was working in my basement. And it did occur to me that I could do something in the public realm. And then in 1976, feminist art gallery opened in Minneapolis called WARM, Women's Art Registry of Minnesota, and I joined that in 1976. And and had the community of women, and we were activists, and we were proudly and strongly feminist, which I still am. And so a lot of the work that I do commemorates the lives of ordinary women. And I do it often through garments. My mother made all of my clothes when I was growing up. She was a gifted seamstress, but she never took a job outside her home when she was married. She didn't feel that, she didn't have the confidence to do that. Today she would have been a wonderful designer. So I learned very early on. I learned to sew, I learned to make clothes. But then I really, as time went on, appreciated the tragedies that were part of women's lives, like this triangle shirtwaist fire, which I had worked with somewhat extensively, making works on paper with smoke and fire, and doing an installation using dresses and a ledger. So the garment shape is really important to me. The cloth, which is the first thing you're wrapped in when you die, and the last thing you're wrapped in when you're buried, is our barrier, is our protection. And when you're in the gallery, you will see that there's a section of blackened steel and chrome pieces that are all from dress patterns. And they are a kind of a wry commentary, perhaps a twisting of the idea of the man as a strong, silent type. It's about the women as a strong, silent type. And that garment is your armor. It is your protection, and you are armed. So I had played with that idea a lot. Some of it with great delicacy and sensitivity, and some of it with some humor.
Well, just knowing we have students in the audience tonight too, I want to just come back to this evolution of your work, Harriet. I think, to me, what was so inspiring, looking at the exhibition again, as well as the catalog, is how, again, there's a through line throughout your career aesthetically that you can recognize immediately, right? As you look at the labels in the exhibit, you will notice that decades may pass, but they are unmistakably works by Harriet Bart. But your concerns have varied and changed. And I also think the way that you've approached your studio practice and the materials you use have changed a lot. So again, for students in the audience, I know maybe we have some studio art and design majors as well as art history. That can be a time in your life where you feel like, well, I have to be one thing. I have to really form this cohesive body of work. I know I was one of those students and they had a BFA show and oh my God, my work isn't, they're all not like each other. What advice can you give, or just what lessons have you taken from a career that has not only been marked by a lot of success, but also seems like you've taken risks. You've probably experienced fear sometimes of, will this work be well received? Just speak to that a little bit.
It's funny that you say that, because one of the things that I worry about and have anxiety about in my own work is that it looks like a group show. So when you tell me that you're seeing the through line, it makes me very happy. Because I didn't know any better, I didn't know that I was supposed to have a signature style. There was a time in school, I can't name the era exactly, when that became very important, that your work had a look to it, had a signature look to it, and that's the way it was supposed to be. I think one of the things that changed that, actually, for all of us, men and women in the arts, is the women's movement. Because the women totally ignored that. And they worked with a variety of materials, and they didn't follow the rules. So I would advise art students to be brave, follow your heart. If you don't know how to do something, look it up on YouTube and figure it out. Ask a friend to help you. Don't be afraid to ask for help. One of the best things that ever happened to me was the time that I was in Warm. I did not have the opportunity to go to graduate school. Don't have an MFA. But Warm was my graduate school, and it was other women, and it doesn't matter, any group of people, your classmates, your friends, whatever, who truly support each other, offer critique, positive, inspiring critique, can help you. I'm in the studio now, a studio building, and there are 23 studios, and then several floors of commercial buildings as well. But I love my community because sometimes I don't know how to do something, and I can find somebody down the hall who can help me out. Or sometimes I can't lift something, and I can find somebody to help me, or I need an eye, and say, I need an eye, please come and talk to me, what's happening here? So have a group, a support system, take a class if you don't know how to do something, try it on your own, follow your heart, make what you need to make, and what you think you're supposed to make. It always works best if you're honest and true to yourself.
Well, and still evolving as you go downstairs and see the work. The period of the last 2 years with COVID has been, I know, a rich period for you
Right.
still exploring and making your practice. So again, it's very inspiring to see that.
It's, I think you also have to, it doesn't hurt to be a little OCD. to just be,
No, I would not thought that.
to be quite determined to get these things done. And the books are an opportunity to be as obsessive as you want to be about that. COVID was really a hard time. It was a hard time for all of us. It was a very hard time for artists. When Governor Walz in Minnesota closed the state, it was Friday the 13th of March. And I went to my studio. I knew that I wasn't going to be there for quite a while. And I cut up a bunch of pieces of paper that were all the same size. I had a little box about this big that had a bunch of stuff in it. Pens and pencils, some collage material, some glue. And I thought, I don't know how long I'm going to be stuck. So I went home. I have an old table in my living room. It's got a bunch of stuff on it. I cleared it and made an 18-inch square space to work on. That was the size of Emily Dickinson's desk. And I thought, if she can do it, I can do it. I had a little 18-inch square, and every day I would try to make another drawing, collage. And I did that for, I don't know, I had over 50 of them. And one day I had a man who was interested in my work come to the studio, was interested in buying something. Now we're no longer confined at home. And I showed him everything, and he just, nothing seemed to be ringing the bell for him. So I showed him these little drawings that I had just finished, and I had them in a beautiful piece of hand marbled paper, and they were about this thick. And I showed them to him, and he said, I'll take that. And I said, well, could I keep it for the weekend so that I could document it all and take photos of everything? And he said, yes. But that became the book that's downstairs. So I was bereft at having lost it, and I was thrilled that somebody wanted it. So it became a book edition of these individuals, the first unbound book I've done. And each of there's 6 folios you'll see downstairs, and each folio has on the front of it a little quote. And all of the quotes are from Emily Dickinson. It's channeling Emily Dickinson at that 18-inch square desk. So things just kind of keep evolving and rolling along. Sometimes something happens in your life and you change direction, or it's inspiring. Trust yourself.
I think if it's either collaboration with artists you know, I think with text and with working with other authors, other book binders, things like that, the idea of collaboration. And strength of your work in a lot of ways to kind of steer you towards new paths, as you said.
I have done a lot of collaborative work. I collaborated with a German artist by the name of Harriet Bart for about 20 years, and we did exhibitions all over Germany. We did them in States as well. We worked together. Our works were very complementary, and that was a wonderful collaboration for me. And then I currently collaborate with a woman in Boston, Yuan Wu, who's a Chinese artist, and we've done exhibitions together, but we've also worked on this project, this Women Refugee Project together too. I really like collaborating. It takes a certain personality to do that. You don't always get your way. But I have the feeling that if you're in a good collaboration, your work is better for it, becomes a little more than it could be just on your own. So that's another thing I encourage students. If you have, it doesn't always work out. For me, I've been fairly lucky. I think coming of age in the women's movement and sitting endlessly in consciousness-raising circles. I learned how to collaborate and work with other people, and I have enjoyed it. And for most of the time, I would say only once did I not have such a good experience. But you can tell that pretty quickly, you just move on. But I really encourage it, and I've learned a lot of things that I would not have come up with on my own. Anything, other questions?
One more bit of time.
Yeah.
We were talking down in the gallery, you said rather emphatically, you're not a painter. This is while we were standing by a painting that, as we were talking about, could have been at the Art Institute of Chicago and Jasper John's retrospective. I mean, just a phenomenally, formally resolved, beautiful painting. So, tell us about, obviously, not being a painter, obviously, as you referenced, as the art world has changed, you've seen and lived through the so-called death of painting, the reaction against modernism in painting, and lived to tell about all that. How has your relationship to painting, what is your relationship to painting here? Because you're a good one. So.
There's an exhibition that's still up at the Walker Art Center by the artist Yanis Kunelis. And it's very conceptual work, and I adore his work. He looks at found objects. He calls himself a painter. He doesn't paint, but he says, I am a painter.
Yeah.
I do paint. I'm not a painter. I make things. And the painters that I know and the friends who are painters really love paint. They love brushes. They love the stroke and the mark. And really they've committed their lives to being painters. I make paintings with my hands. Sometimes I use a brush, not always. Sometimes I just use my hands. Sometimes I use rags. Sometimes I work on them on the floor. You'll see a painting down there that I wanted. It's like a book to me, and we were talking about it. I wanted an addendum. So I had to find somebody with an industrial sewing machine to add an extra part onto it. And then I knotted cord, and that's hanging over it. And then I put on cheesecloth. And so they are like fabric constructions to me. It's not different than fiber, fabrics, cloth, and that's how I see it. I have the worst collection of brushes you could ever imagine. I don't take care of them, they're a mess. I use them for glue, I use them in any way that I need to. I like them when they're ratty and old, so they're very scratchy. But I don't think I'm a painter. I only turn to painting when that's what I need to say what I want to say, and then it's just a material. But I don't think like a painter. That painting shows, but I would never call myself a painter.
That makes sense.
I think before we turn it over for Q&A, I have one more just
Sure.
as, you are in our Art on Campus collection. We talked a little bit about public art and your relationship to that, but we do have right outside in the Anderson Sculpture Garden, your work, which was originally at Cat Hall. But I'd like you to kind of speak about, you mentioned public art, but in terms of the idea of, it kind of, I think, ties together the idea of remembrance, or pay attention to what others tell you to forget, and how that kind of fits into the work.
Are you talking specifically about that piece?
Sure, or,
Or any piece within memory? Well, we all grow up with commemorative art, whether it's in your church or in your park. And we try to, or the history, the purveyors of history, try to give us things to look at. Mine is based on much more personal subject matter. So even when I was working, the project was designed for Cat Hall. And I was very interested in that because Harriet Bart was one of the suffragists. I am a feminist. That interested me a lot. So I was thinking about how I would approach that in my research and how the piece that was made for that would be a supportive structure. But we have to be flexible. Things move and change. One of the things that we added, so it changed quite a bit. It's a very different piece now. But the bronze book pilasters have been moved. They're on the wall. We added, or I added the bronze owl. I really like owls, not because I know anything about birds, but because I like them in mythology as representing wisdom. And Athena's often seen with an owl. guide. So we have an owl in downstairs in Reckoning, and it's a casting from the owl that was made for a piece that's now in the Anderson Sculpture Park. Sculpture Garden. So I think that it would be harder for me to do a piece of public art with an assigned subject. I think the public art that I've done has always been of my own creation. So I might see a site and I'm asked to do something for it. I particularly like to do things for libraries, love libraries. I've done a number of sculptures and installations for libraries, probably my favorite thing to do. But I've never been told that you have to make a piece that speaks to anything really specific. So I keep that part to myself, the creative part. And I've been really honored to have had the opportunity to create public art. It's not that I wouldn't do it again, but it takes a certain energy that I think I no longer have for that, for the meetings, the committees. There's a lot that goes on. There isn't a public artist around who hasn't had to change things because the weed whacker can't get to that. And that gets Lynette knows all about that. I'm sure it frustrates you too. So I turned more to doing my own work, but I do kind of miss having things in the public realm.
Thank you all again for coming. Thank you, Harriet and David. Downstairs in the first floor gallery, there's the show, but also down in the ground floor as well, so be sure to see both. Thank you again to.
I just want to thank.
Go ahead, yeah.
Can I just thank?
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to thank Lynette and Sydney and I'm afraid to name names, but I'll forget somebody. Caitlin and Jocelyn and everybody who's worked so hard on this project with me, and I've had a wonderful time being here. Thank you for having me. You've been great hosts. I feel very welcome. Thank you. You beat me to it. Go for it.
I want to thank our group here, Sydney, David, and Harriet, all of you for coming, but especially Harriet. It's a long time in coming in terms of when we present our public art. That is wonderful in its own right. But one of the things that the Petersen Art Museum does, and it's the only one in the United States that does, is focus on public art. And when we bring artists back to show a larger body of work, that is for the enrichment and the imagination of our students and faculty. It's to show that artist and their work in a larger context. And you can see how deep it goes. Harriet brings great depth and great expanse to us at Iowa State. And so to have you as an audience, and especially our students, come and participate with Harriet and take those messages forward. So your homework, ISU students, bring 10 kids in and give them a tour. Embrace some of the curiosity, the knowledge, and the depths of feeling that she's been able to share with us tonight. I actually want to add my thanks for you to come, go downstairs, and have a good time. But I had the privilege, before you all got here tonight, I spent about 30 minutes by myself in that gallery. It was the best 30 minutes by myself I've had in years. It was really enlightening and spiritual. So come back, there's not a whole lot of people around, and really just take time, even sit on the floor. I sat on the floor for a while, it was great. Really take a look and just breathe it in. Thank you for coming.